Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 329 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. Well, it's a windy old start to the winter period with yet another storm blowing across the British Isles, battering coastlines and blowing over trees. Hopefully, we've all done enough to keep ourselves and our hives safe and secure. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. It's a wet and windy start to the day, and I'm tucked up here in the office at our unit in Norwich, listening to the rain beating down on the roof and wondering how the colonies are faring out in the apiaries. I hope you're all safe and well. I'm shaking off this first winter bug, still trying to get rid of it, but glad to report it feels like I'm heading out of the heavy brain fog that accompanies these illnesses, and I'm beginning to feel a little more lively. Not that this weather is helping, to be fair. It's been fairly gloomy and, well, downright dull for a while now, although we did get some bright sunshine last Friday, so it hasn't been all bad. Thank you to everyone for the lovely messages of support and thoughtful suggestions for cures for the latest bug that's hit me. Steph's suggestion of sliced onions in my socks is one that I've still passed on for now, but the others are all being tried, particularly the ones involving single malt whiskies. It's a tricky old time of year for everyone, us and our bees, and I for one am already looking forward to the new year and new season. Lots of plans in place already. I'm optimistic I can get my various ailments sorted and be ready for an early spring start. Always the positive outlook, right? There's not been much happening here at the Norfolk Honey Company. In between managing illnesses and trying to get honey orders out to our stockists locally, I've managed to have a drive around a few of the apiaries and take a quick look at what's been going on. Interestingly, the temperatures have been on the up. It doesn't take much for the bees to grab at an opportunity to get out on cleansing flights and maybe a little water gathering. Just a couple of days ago, I popped over to the fishing lakes with Steph to get some fresh air really, have a short walk with Marley and check in on the colonies to make sure that all was okay. For the most part, everything's fine. The mild weather meant the colonies were out flying, and it's a great time to spot anything that might cause concern. This is easily revealed by colonies that are not flying. Strong, healthy colonies on milder days will undoubtedly have bees out and about. Entrances will be active, if not busy, but you should see plenty of bees going about their business. The ones to focus on are those that have little or no activity at the entrance. This could be a sign of a very small colony or even a dead one, and it's worth a quick check. Firstly, have a look at the entrance area. Are there any dead bees on the landing board, or if you don't have a landing board, on the ground immediately outside the hive? Then take a look in the entrance, that little area where the entrance block reveals the bottom of the floor going into the hive. Is it blocked by dead bees or any other obstructions? It's very easy to quickly check if a colony is okay and at the same time make an assessment of the relative strength of that colony. Here's what I do. Now, just before I begin, it's important to say you might want to wear your bee suit. Sometimes, with some colonies, they can look inactive, but as soon as you pop the top, they whiz out to greet you. Let's not get all the way through the season with minimal stings, only to get stung on the nose just before Christmas. It's not the kind of present I, or I'm sure that you, would want to receive. So, with that alert registered, unstrap the hive. That is, if you have it strapped. Some people use bricks. I've even seen bags of what appear to be soil just placed on top of beehives just to keep the roof in place. But anyway, take off whatever you've got that's holding the roof on and take a look at what's going on inside. Of course, you'll all have a range of different hives with different setups, so let's tackle the easy one first. My honey pour hives with the clear coverboard, or crown board as you will most likely know it. Here, the clear perspex sheet comes into its own. For most, if not all of our honey pour hives that go through the winter, we don't have any additional food stores on them in the form of either a super or an eek. It's large enough to simply sit as a 10-frame Langstroth hive and has, for the most part, enough food stores to allow the colony to see out the winter. I might add an eek and some fondant in late winter, but normally not. So, the roof comes off, the clear perspex coverboard is revealed, and very quickly you can see how the colony looks without disturbing them in the slightest. It's a simple task to count the seams of bees if the colony is in a cluster, but more likely with the honey pour hives there will be lots of bees milling around the top bars of the brood frames. If it's a smaller colony, I can quickly assess its comparative strength, consider its chances of survival for the rest of the winter, and pop the roof back on to protect them, and all this done in just a few seconds. For the more traditional wooden beehives, you may have invested in what's known as a quilt, and can do exactly the same thing. On that point, it's not too late to swap out a crown board for a glass or perspex quilt. No, we're not talking a duvet here. If you check out the link in the podcast notes, you'll see exactly what I mean. It's a wooden frame with 2 glass or perspex sections in it and a further wooden bar across the middle to support the 2 glass sections. You can also get foam or insulation quilts, but this particular quilt that I'm talking about is the one that has the glass or perspex to allow you to see what's going on inside the hive. You can get them for most hive types, and it really does allow you to see your bees and any activity that's taking place in the hive without actually disturbing them. They're fantastic, really. If I only had 1 or 2 beehives at the bottom of the garden, I would definitely have these across both of my hives for the entire winter. If you don't have a glass quilt or clear coverboard, then you're going to need to ease up the crown board or whatever cover you have in place on your hive to expose the brood frames so you can see what's going on. If you're doing that, it's also a good time to get into oxalic acid treatments, so you might combine the two in order to limit the disturbance within that colony. Remember, at this time of the year, the less you disturb the bees, the better, so only do this if you really have a need. Obviously, with a quilt or clear coverboard, it's a lot less intrusive, so a quick peek isn't going to do any real damage. So back to my trip around the apiaries at the fishing lakes. Lots of flying bees, the briefest of sunny periods, and a slight increase in temperature, and the bees are out flying. But there were a couple of nukes that I wanted to check because of exactly what I've been describing. No flying bees or any activity at the entrance, where the other colonies were very active. These nucleus colonies are the 14 by 12 boxes from BS honeybees, well insulated and perfect for overwintered nukes. The one colony that was particularly of concern was one that has featured in a number of videos recently, and one that was very small but that we'd added a few frames of brood to in an attempt to build up its numbers before the winter kicked in. There was no activity at the entrance, and I could see 1 or 2 dead bees just inside the entrance disc, a worrying sign. It's a quick enough task to unstrap the Thorns cantilever strap. The roof, in this instance, was on the feeder, and removing it revealed no activity around the fondant that we had been feeding them, another indication that something was wrong. Removing the fondant, all I could see was bare brood frame top bars. No bees at all. this pretty much confirmed to me that we have a terminal situation here. So popping the feeder off the main nuke body, I was anticipating the worst, and sure enough, they'd unfortunately died out. There had been some wasp activity around the entrance a few weeks earlier, wasps sneaking in unchallenged, and that was the first real indication that there may have been a problem. At that time, I decided to leave the colony where it was, as I didn't want these wasps moving on to another nucleus colony, having destroyed this one. I quickly put the nuke box back together, strapped it down and closed the entrance disc. It's important to remove any dead colonies as quickly as you can through the winter months. As I stood discussing what had happened with Steph, it was noticeable that there were a few scout bees drifting around the entrance that was now closed, and it wouldn't have been long before robbing would have been in full swing. It's always disappointing when a colony is lost, but Steph and I had always known that there was a risk with a few of the smaller 14 by 12 nukes, so it wasn't unexpected. In an adjacent smaller apiary, we have around 6 or 7 14 by 12 nukes, again all BS honeybees polyboxers, and a quick check on these has also revealed a couple of smaller colonies. Now, they're not completely doomed, but with colder weather yet to come, I suspect they may well be under threat. Unfortunately, it's really too late to do anything with them. Combining them is not an option now. We could have done so earlier in the autumn, but we'll keep an eye on them and maybe see if we can get some little more supplemental insulation inside the nuke box maybe. These are colonies with just 1 or 2 seams of bees and not full end-to-end seams of bees, so I think they're quite likely to fail, but we'll see what happens. The point here for everyone is to keep checking your bees through the winter months. Just a simple, watchful eye. There's no need to open them up unless you suspect a more serious issue. And of course, continually opening them and checking them is probably going to do more damage than good. If they're flying and the entrance is clear, just heft them and leave them to get on with it. Another threat that we've seen a lot of recently on our apiary visits is the green woodpecker. If it weren't for the damage they cause to our beehives occasionally, I'd say they're one of the most beautiful native birds we have here in the UK. They're really shy, and it's usually quite difficult to get close to them. But sometimes, just sometimes, when they're focused on finding food on the ground, we do get within good viewing distances of them, and they are lovely to see. If only they weren't so damn destructive. Over the years, despite rolls and rolls of chicken wire, they've sometimes found a vulnerability within our defences and punched a ruddy great hole in the side wall of a hive. Whether it's wooden or poly, it makes no difference. Once they work out what to do, there's usually no stopping them. So we've taken preemptive action this year, particularly at the farm apiaries. We've had years in the past where hives have really suffered, so we've moved our poly nukes back to the paddock from the farm to secure them away from these vandals. That's not to say the paddock isn't vulnerable too, so I think next week we may need to get some chicken wire on order to get these hives wrapped up securely. Now, the Technoset hives that we have there are just fine. The hard plastic outer shell is great protection from the woodpeckers. It's just the honeypore and poly nukes that we need to protect. If you see any green woodpeckers around your apiaries, I would get your hives protected before we get any hard frosts. If the woodpeckers can't dig into the ground, they'll look for an alternative food source, and it could be your hives. Well, it's a slightly shorter podcast this week. As a final note, my chat with Paul Horton has been really well received. Thank you for all of your kind comments. And with that in mind, I'm looking for other guests to interview. So if you have anyone you'd like to hear from, do drop me a message. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website, www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.